The other day, while perusing through YouTube, we stumbled upon a video uploaded by Destiny, a Twitch streamer and political debater. In it, he had set up two different people to debate and discuss the idea that wage labor is theft, and it features Exkillsmeh, an Irish laddie. Exkillsmeh is a pro-capitalist with a bachelor's degree in economics, and Irish laddie, also known as Vosh, is an anarcho-syndicalist, Twitch streamer, and artist. I listened to the debate and was struck by the elementary inadequacy of Exkillsmeh's points, and found Irish laddie had a hard time breaking them down and challenging them in real time. He also was just generally ignorant on a lot of the points that Exkillsmeh had brought up, so I figured I would jump in and challenge Exkillsmeh properly in a way that doesn't allow him to snipe points and interrupt. This debate was 2 hours long. This is going to be a doozy, but I'll do my best. First is Exkillsmeh.
The fundamental insight that led to modern economics, promoted by Adam Smith, was that the actual act of trade creates value. When two people engage in a voluntary trade, both are better off than they were before the trade. So both sides receive a surplus, and that's the fundamental law of trade, is that when there's a voluntary trade, both sides receive surplus. And when you have an involuntary trade, then that's not necessarily the case.
Exkillsmeh says frequently in the first 10 minutes that the laborer receives a surplus. This is impossible. The quantity of labor is determined by hours of labor time. In order for the laborer to receive a surplus, they must gain time from the transaction. Now let us posit that a laborer works their job for 8 hours a day making generic widgets. At the end of the day, the boss hands them a check for the day equal to the hours that they worked. In order for the worker to have a surplus, they must receive more pay than their wage for 8 hours would normally be, i.e. being paid for 9 hours work. This is not done in the average capitalist workplace, and if so, infrequently and never by any frugal capitalist. As money is the commodity in which all other commodities measure their value, including labor power, this is the only circumstance in which a surplus would be possible for the laborer. On the flip side, after paying the worker, the capitalist takes the produced widgets and sells them on the market. The price of this sale is defined by the average price all widgets sell for, Z, and the given cost of the labor power, X, in wage over the average time it takes to create a widget. If the worker were to sell the widget themselves, then wage would equal the market price, X equals Z, but this is not the case. Instead, the capitalist must generate their own income, so they pay the worker less than the market value of the object, the difference defined as Y surplus value. Therefore, the equation under this system is X plus Y equals Z. In order for the trade to be worthwhile, this must be the case. If Y is negative or 0, then the capitalist would be losing money or not gaining anything, and therefore would not hire the worker. So Y must be positive. This means the only place the capitalist can have any leniency in their expenses is on labor. Therefore, the capitalist must pay the laborer less than the market value for the product. The employee-employer trade, then, is a deficit for the employee and a surplus for the employer. Moving on, the claim that the act of trade creates value has been deconstructed extensively by Marxist economists. Yes, that is a thing. Now, seeing as he was rather vague in his mention of better off, we're going to assume he means the theory proposed by the Austrian school, namely subjective value theory or marginal utility theory. To summarize, marginal utility is the idea that when two people engage in trade, profit is created by the difference in subjective evaluation of the two goods. Person A may be selling apples and person B oranges. As person A has a surplus of apples, person A values apples very little. The same can be said about person B and their oranges. However, as neither side possesses the fruit the other possesses, their subjective values rise, i.e. person A values oranges more than apples. Thus, when a trade is made, both are better off. I will apply this to labor markets in a bit. This definition is convenient as it allows the defender to sidestep the burden of proving that exploitation among the working class exists, as profit does not rise from the worker. Other things such as scarcity and supply and demand play into marginal utility, but are far less ubiquitous as subjective evaluation. Additionally, this view of value also establishes an individualist mindset and helps combat the notion of class within the capitalist system. This mindset allows one to view capitalism as the fundamental expression of human freedom, and ignores the fact that all of these systems exist within institutions that we have very little to no choice in. We have a myriad of inconsequential choices and limited consequential ones. Just because one values one object over another does not mean that the exchange value of the commodities change. Once again, the commodity with which all other commodities measure their value is money. Therefore, marginal utility theory breaks down when applied to such transactions, as we are no longer handling two commodities, but three. In a vacuum, persons A and B may be capable of hashing out an exchange value between their apples and oranges, likely 1-to-1, but this falls apart when we introduce money. When a person in capitalist society wishes to purchase something, we cannot usually perform such subjective value judgments in trade. We We must go to work, earn a wage, and spend that wage on the things we want. This, however, is only after we have given most of our wage to the landlord, mortgage company, and the state. Persons A and B are only in this position because they have access to different resources. If person B had apples and A oranges, the trade would be unnecessary. So in order for the capitalist system to uphold this theory, it must reproduce the foundation of the transaction. It withholds the worker's survival needs in order to encourage the worker to exchange their labor with the capitalist for a wage. The worker then uses this wage to purchase their means of subsistence. Thus, people are always dependent on the market. This fundamental coercion is how the capitalist system functions. In order to hold up the abstraction, capitalism has had to envision a specific type of property relation. Now, one may make the argument that it is not the individual capitalist's fault that this coercion exists, and this is true. However, the capitalist is a member of the class of people that do make this kind of coercion possible, so the capitalist is responsible for this, albeit indirectly. When you or I, in the capitalist system, are trading goods, we are not doing so directly, apples for oranges. We are doing so indirectly through a third commodity, money. When we engage in the market for consumption, we are not capable of weighing our subjective value of our money. The commodities we must purchase are pre-labeled with prices devoid of any personal value judgments. Subjective evaluations were supposed to explain price, and now we are observing some sort of objective value placed independently of subjective evaluation. This can't be right. We're stuck in circular reasoning. Additionally, money has no utility beyond its purchasing power of other commodities. The power of money is defined by what it can buy, and these are not set by our preferences. Instead, it reflects money's relations to all other commodities. This is a highly condensed version. I'll have references to my sources below. Therefore, profit cannot be generated in exchange, as all commodities are exchanged for one commodity, money.
So it's basically somewhat the inverse of a monopoly. So when you have a monopoly, you have a lot of buyers and very few suppliers, right?
Okay.
And that gives the suppliers a lot of bargaining power in the market, and they have a lot of power to set prices and set margins that they wouldn't have in a more competitive market. So a monopsony is sort of the inverse in that there are actually not very many buyers and there are a lot of sellers. So this actually defines labor market, because in the labor market, the supply is actually the laborers and the buyers are the actual capitalists or the businesses.
Okay.
Monopsony. Economics. Noun. Monopsony. Plural noun. Monopsonies. 1. A market situation in which there is only one buyer. Exkillsmeh's likening of the labor market is a gross oversimplification of the role the social structures and leverages play in the capitalist workplace. In our previous fruit-based trade example, the trade was fair because both parties had full and total control over the utility of their product, i.e. apples and oranges are both food products and thus have objective value as food. There is an equal power dynamic between the two farmers, and thus it is impossible for one or the other to walk away having been exploited. This is not how the capitalist workplace works. The worker lacks the means to turn their product labor into any objective use value. To do this, they require the means of production. Without access to the means of production, the potential labor capacity of the worker is zero. Therefore, the capitalist holds leverage over the worker as they provide access to the means of production. In exchange for this, the capitalist claims the product of the worker's labor as his own, each item having been imbued with its objective use value by the act of labor upon it. Later, Exkillsmeh mentions opportunity costs and leftist failure to acknowledge those are not the fault of the capitalists. This is fundamentally incorrect, though. It is a rather high probability that the worker would much rather perform labor under a different system that does not force them to engage via coercion. This isn't an opportunity cost or a problem of causing or allowing harm. This is a deliberate action undertaken by the capitalist class as a collective that makes survival impossible unless one sells their labor. The labor market is also not a true monopsony. Many employers, buyers, do exist. They are just less numerous than the workers. Just because the workers are more numerous than the employers does not mean that the market is a monopsony, as that would require a single buyer. Though, then, if the workers are more numerous, why are they not able to exercise control over the market? Simple, because of coercion. In order for the comparison to work, Exkillsmeh had to reduce the worker to a product without any maintenance requirements. Workers are not products that will simply be stored in a warehouse until their laborers sell prices to their satisfaction. They are at a fundamental disadvantage in the bargaining process. Collectively, their higher numbers actually work in their detriment, as the excessive availability of desperate workers drives the wages of the workers down, not up. Someone will always be willing to sell for cheaper. It becomes a race to the bottom. We only see wage growth when an outside force, such as the government, skill, experience, or collective action, enacts an upward pressure on the market value of a particular field of labor, i.e. computer programmers, carpenters, etc. In other words, as the number of available workers decreases, the demand for that work increases, thus leading to an increase in wages. The same pressure does not apply to unskilled or simple labor. The threat of unemployment, therefore, is the coercive force that pushes the worker to accept an unfair trade agreement. This is also why capitalism will never eradicate unemployment.
The fact that, and I think you've mentioned this on stream before, the fact that larger companies pay their workers more than smaller companies.
Here lies a fundamental misunderstanding of why this is the case. Larger companies have a more substantial capital base with which to manipulate the local market. We have seen this when big box stores such as Walmart enter a market full of smaller competitors. They're able to use their substantial capital to operate at a loss for a given amount of time to A, drop prices low enough so as to undercut the smaller businesses, and B, they pay employees more to starve the smaller businesses of the production force. As soon as the smaller businesses have been eradicated, the larger companies then drop prices and labor to the margins that best maximize their profits, raising the price of goods and lowering the wages of the worker.
In a voluntary trade, and that's an emphasis on voluntary trade, both sides receive surplus value from the trade.
Here, Exkillsmeh once again assumes that the trade between the worker and the capitalist is a voluntary one.
So it's so leftist tactics to be on this fantasy desert island world.
Exkillsmeh's complete dismissal of abstraction in this instance is ironic, as often the clearest way of describing marginal utility theory requires the abstraction of almost every element of capitalist society. This is not a real rebuttal, but an appeal to the meme, as a tactic for falsification of Irish Laddie's metaphorical abstraction. Please see the link to the Law of Value Part 8 in the description.
Yeah, so that's not exploitative because the opportunity costs aren't the result of some third party oppressing you. It's not somebody's fault if you don't get food and die. That's just the state of nature, right? Yeah, so that's not exploitative because the opportunity costs aren't the result of some third party oppressing you.
The means by which we must obtain food in our modern society is not the state of nature. This appeal to nature fallacy completely ignores the fact that the very nature of private property has made it socially impossible to obtain food in any other circumstance than the capitalist wage system.
Leftists are interested in the study of power and social dynamics, and if you look at the decisions that play into a person's lifestyle, what type of job they decide to work, what career they go into, who they choose as a partner, all of these decisions, there's really no such thing as a voluntary choice, or at least not a choice completely free of outside influence.
Irish Laddie nails this. It is an incredibly succinct way of describing the limitations of economics. The problem with modern economics is it divorces the economic factors from sociology, production, politics, and basically any other field that may influence their economic theory. They analyze economics in a vacuum, devoid of the reality of the worker's relationship with the commodities, the world around them, and the means of production. This is why Marx's invention of dialectical materialism is so influential in leftist theory and economics. Exkillsmeh tries to rebut this via an appeal to individualism.
Problem, Irish Laddie. That's why your ideology will always fail. Because if you don't ask why people aren't doing what they're doing, then you don't understand the situation.
Once again, he ignores the very real social limiting factors on the individual. Instead, he focuses on the choice and how they may not have chosen the optimal choice for their situation. This assumes that there was more than one choice.
That's why your system is always going to fail. Because you live in a world where you expect this trade to happen in the absence of surplus. What incentive do producers have to hire workers if they receive zero surplus from those workers?
See, here Exkillsmeh performs a very subtle switch. First, he frames the argument from the capitalist perspective, asking what incentive they have to hire a worker if they are not receiving a surplus. This is the contention of socialism. We oppose this interaction. He then conflates capitalists with producers. This is an incredibly naive and incorrect conflation. Capitalists are not producers. The workers are producers. They are the ones that take the raw materials and give it an objective use value, which the capitalist sells in the market for profit. So when we reframe the argument in the correct way, we see the nature of the capitalist workplace. What incentive do workers have to engage in this transaction if they gain no surplus from their employers? They have one incentive: survival. I'll play this again so you can hear it for yourselves.
What incentive do producers have to hire workers if they receive zero surplus from those workers? But in the real world, where it's like, oh, if you don't work, then you starve, that's not anybody coming and shooting you if you don't engage in that trade. That's just a natural outcome of you deciding to defer from that trade.
Exkillsmeh does this a lot. He reasserts that this is simply a matter of opportunity costs, while completely ignoring the real social pressures and hoarding them by the capitalist class to perpetuate the foundation that supports this dynamic.
Your system, your way of looking at things, is utterly agnostic to pre-existing systems of oppression. My system is interested primarily in dismantling an oppression, in assisting people in making free choices, free to their own agency, free of bigotry, of oppression, of coercion. My system is interested in making life better.
𝚅𝙴𝚁𝚃 once again hits home the issue with modern economics and capitalism as a whole. It is completely unaware of the existing social oppression that exists, and thus we never fully describe reality. So rather than address a specific instance, I'm going to address this now and avoid every other mention of the no other system has pulled more out of poverty than capitalism, and point the viewer to the works of BadMouseProductions and Peter Coffin, links in the description.
𝚅𝙴𝚁𝚃 has basically said he would give me the bullet in his real world.
This is where Exkillsmeh pulls out the "but you would kill me" card. And while I understand that 𝚅𝙴𝚁𝚃 was likely speaking in hyperbole, he does quite a bit, I know where 𝚅𝙴𝚁𝚃 is coming from. 𝚅𝙾𝚃𝚰 and Michel Foucault in Stokely Speaks and Society Must Be Defended, respectively, speak about politics as a form of violence. To quote Foucault, politics is just the continuation of war by another means. Therefore, physical violence in response to the economic and political violence of the hoarding of the means of production is a completely valid response, particularly as 𝚅𝙴𝚁𝚃 has said he had the bullet attracting quality. Thus, he would attract the violence unto himself. Those who wish to maintain such a system put themselves in the way of such violence. For an easily digestible breakdown, watch Intro to Anarchy, Power, and Politics and The Philosophy of Antifa, both by PhilosophyTube. This also leads me to the friend-enemy distinction. The friend and enemy distinction, posited by philosopher and Nazi Carl Schmitt, says that your political enemies are people you might get along with or even like, but when push comes to shove, you will not necessarily kill them, but let them die. You'd be okay with them being removed. This is where 𝚅𝙴𝚃𝚃 is coming from, I believe. You may correct me on this. They return to this point repeatedly throughout the discussion, and Exkillsmeh likens this type of violence to genocide. This is very disingenuous, as genocide is a deliberate and planned extermination of political or ethnic opponents. This is where most get the violence of fascists and Antifa mixed up. While fascists will kill you simply because you belong to a group, are communist, are black, or a Jew, one can avoid an anti-fascist violence simply by denouncing their previous beliefs and stepping aside. Should Exkillsmeh understand and step aside, he would save himself from such violence. But for as long as he sets himself up as an enemy of a revolution, he will be a target simply by the nature of standing in the way.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.